Anaïs Nin, from 1955 to 1966, was married to two men, Hugh Guiler, known as Hugo, whom she married in 1923 and who lived in New York, and Rupert, who lived in California. The marriage with Pole was annulled in 1966 for legal and tax reasons after Nin became famous, but she never left him. In fact, she lived exclusively with him for the last 2 years of her life, while never divorcing Guiler. Anaïs Nin was 18 when she met Hugh Guiler, 6 years her senior, and immediately compared him to her cousin, with whom she had shared a youthful infatuation. She writes in 1921, "Mr. Guiler carries Emerson in his pocket, loves Stevenson, and writes a journal. All the things I loved in Eduardo had come back to me in someone else, mixed with still more seriousness and wisdom. This is the impression I have of Mr. Guiler, that he is strong, manly, and yet with a poet's heart and mind. Oh, what might come of this stranger who has knocked at the door of my inward world in the name of poetry, books." The couple began a long, cautious, and awkward courtship, and nearly 2 years later, Guiler, fearing his strict Protestant family's reaction to his thoughts of marrying a non-Anglo-Catholic girl, fled to Scotland. Nin's mother consequently took her to Havana and introduced her to Cuban society to find her a rich husband. When Guiler heard of this, he defied his family and sailed to Havana and finally married Nin there in 1923. The marriage got off to a faltering start. Both were sexually inexperienced, and they were physically incompatible, painfully so. Nin was also disillusioned with the bourgeois life her husband, now a banker, offered her, and she began to seek sexual and intellectual satisfaction elsewhere. First in France, with Guiler's former professor, the much older John Erskine. While the Erskine affair was unconsummated, Nin's next one, with the rogue author Henry Miller, was anything but. Nin tried mightily to keep Guiler in the dark about the affairs, but there were plenty of times when he rightly suspected the worst. Still, he stuck with her. After coming back to the States at the outset of World War II, Nin grew tired of supporting Miller financially, and she left him, beginning several years of short-lived affairs with lovers as young as 17 and as old as the father like Edmund Wilson, vainly seeking the mythical man who could complete her, as she put it. One fateful day in March 1947, Nin met someone who would ultimately prove to be the ideal man she sought, an out-of-work actor 16 years her junior, Rupert. In Joyous Transformation, Nin writes, "There was a party at the Chelsea Hotel, the old-fashioned hotel writers loved. I entered the elevator. A very tall, very slender young man lowered his head to see the other passengers. I became aware of large eyes, brown, green, gold, eyes the color of Venice. The whole design of his neck and shoulders was of extreme stylization, and yet he looked sturdy. We happened to sit on a couch, and then we noticed each other's hands, ink-stained as only printers get stained. He was an actor, and between jobs he helped his friend print Christmas cards, and I was printing my own books. We found much to talk about. He accepted my invitation to visit me. Hugo was away. I had bought a leg of lamb. In that small kitchen, he took over the seasoning and acted so at ease that I enjoyed his taking over. We had a delicious dinner. Then we sat on the couch and put on some recording. In the middle of Tristan and Isolde, he kissed me, and we made love. I had never responded fully to the first lovemaking. With him, I did. We seemed incredibly well matched. And then he invited her to travel with him to California, where he would study forestry. She accepted. Thus began her trapeze life, swinging between New York and California for most of the rest of her life. In New York, Anaïs Nin Guiler was the elegant banker's wife who habituated fine restaurants, museums, and theaters. In California, Anais Paul was a forest ranger's wife, living in the Sierra Madre Mountains, scrubbing floors, packing lunches, and mending socks. The two lives could not be much more opposite. She made excuses for her trips. To Hugo, she would say she needed the serenity of California in order to write. To Rupert, she would say she had writing assignments for fictional employers in New York. "My trapeze is working," she wrote in 1952. But something had changed. She began to resent Hugo and her dependency on him. Yet she needed his income to survive, not to mention to travel to California. She thought of divorce or a separation, but she was unable to find a viable way to do it. Then, when Hugo admitted to a sexual fling with a dancer during one of her many absences, Nin, encouraged, blurted out that she had a lover too, a casual one in California. Silence. Then, an eruption, a jealousy-fueled tantrum. The marriage between Hugo and Anais, already severely damaged by her bi-coastal life, worsened to the point that they no longer slept in the same bedroom. In 1972, she writes, "The last time I was in New York, I realized I am bad to Hugo because I feel imprisoned. I do not want to be there. I do not feel connected to him. His presence depresses me. We are bad for each other. Why won't he recognize it? Why won't he see?" As time went on, Anais began to consider Rupert her true husband, because although there were faults, there was a fiery passion that never lost its potency. In Joyous Transformation, she writes at age 70, "Nature has been kind to me. Sensual love can continue as long as emotional love is alive. I often desire Rupert because of something he has done or said that touches me." When you love somebody for a long time, the expression of the body, its presence, takes on emotional attributes, and lovers do not lose desire because of the signs of age. He is so youthful when he body surfs the highest waves. I am youthful when friends come, and I talk with liveliness and am alert to what is said. But the most beautiful of all truths is that Rupert and I maintained intensity. In the heat and sensuous beauty of Puerto Vallarta, we made such absolute love that I cried out, "It is too much! It is too much!" It was almost unbearably keen. Unknown to Anais, however, just as she was celebrating literary fame and transcendence over age, a misdiagnosed cancer was spreading throughout her body. During her trip to Bali in 1974, she was bleeding and had digestive problems. And when she made her final visit to Paris later that year, she was living on tea, toast, and darvan. Despite their numerous problems with each other, Hugo accompanied Anais to Paris since he had business there, but they stayed in separate hotels. She could barely stand to be with him, as their marriage had descended into moroseness and depression. It would be the last time Anais saw Hugo, for once she returned to California, the cancer engulfed her. In Joyous Transformation, she writes, "The pains increased, became intolerable. So the doctor made me take tests, 2 days in the hospital, then home again to await the results. On New Year's Eve, I was told the cancer is threatening the urethra or the intestines. There is no alternative to surgery. If there is no invasion of the bladder or intestines, all is well. But if there is, I will be mutilated with a hole in my stomach and a bag for evacuation. I have courage for the surgery, but none for the mutilation. Her worst fears were realized. It was then that Rupert Pole rose to the occasion. Anais writes, Rupert's love flared into passion, passionate care and sensual passion, saying plainly, "Don't leave me. You're the love of my life," making me feel wanted, loved, desired. Rupert's devotion is absolute. He fights for my health, makes me walk, eat, swim. As Anais battled her disease, she began to wonder what caused it. Dr. Brew Joy, an alternative healer, investigated the possibility of martyrdom, taking illness and pain from the world. Anais writes, but martyrdom brought up the consciousness of sacrifice, atonement, guilt, and I was back in a well of guilt. Hugo, of course. Dr. Joy said I would not get well until I lived truthfully and was free of Hugo. This is the most difficult thing I've ever had to do, but I need to save my life. Otherwise, I will die of guilt. She wrote to her psychiatrist, Inga Bogner, in New York. She wrote a letter to Hugo, but couldn't find the courage to send it, or perhaps she feared hurting him further. Finally, she called Dr. Bogner, who in turn called Hugo. Hugo, who by now hadn't seen Anais for 2 years, wrote her a letter. Inga said, you asked if I could do something to give you emotional freedom at this time. I want to relieve you completely from any guilt. I am infinitely grateful for what I received from you and for achieving in yourself your own goals as I predicted you would. All this more than compensates for whatever I gave you. If I thought you had failed me in any way, I would not feel as devoted to you today as I do. On the contrary, I feel that to have lived with you for so many years, in spite of all the ups and downs, was a privilege any man would be proud of. I, for one, will continue always to think of you as the ideal woman in my life. Once, speaking of the liberation of woman, you said that in your case, you had been liberated by your husband. I want to liberate you emotionally, so please let me know if there's any further assurance you need from me. Love, Hugo. On January 14, 1977, only a few weeks after Hugo's letter, Anaïs Nin left this earth. At least for a brief time, she had the peace of living one life, one love, and an absence of strain she had never known. On February 23rd, Hugo wrote a letter to Rupert Pole that Benjamin Franklin V calls a masterpiece of civility in his introduction to A Joyous Transformation. Dear Rupert, as we're going to be communicating with each other from now on, I think it is well that I do what I can to make things as easy as possible for us both, and I want to start by being quite frank with you. First, I've been quite aware for more than 10 years of your special relationship with Anais, and I want you to know that I have not only respected that, but have been and am grateful to you for having made her last years happy. There was a tacit understanding between Anais and me during those years that we would allow each other to lead relatively independent lives, and that this would in no way alter the deep devotion we felt towards each other, a devotion that became even stronger towards the end. I am also grateful for all the help you gave Anais during her long illness. I wanted to share this burden with you, but Anais told me that my health would have broken if I had attempted to do this. In the light of the above, I hope you will feel at ease in communicating directly with me from now on. Sincerely yours, Hugo. Hugh Guiler died in 1985. Rupert Pole, who acted as Anaïs Nin's literary executor and kept her work alive, died in 2006.